From the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on personal autonomy. An agent is one who acts. In order to act, one must initiate one's action. And one cannot initiate one's action without exercising one's power to do so. Since nothing and no one has the power to act except the agent herself, she alone is entitled to exercise this power if she is entitled to act. In short, every agent has an authority over herself that is grounded not in her political or social role, nor in any law or custom, but in the simple fact that she alone can initiate her actions.
June 18th. Last night, Yelena was hit by a car. My phone rang at about 12:30, and on the other end was her voice, smothered in tears. I was expecting something different. We'd been fighting earlier. We'd had an awkward goodbye. I was kind of expecting a breakup call. She told me she'd been hit by a car, had a broken wrist and a broken ankle, some other abrasions, but no other injuries. She told me she needed surgery. By the time she called, she'd been at the hospital for over 2 hours. She told me she was at VGH. I called a cab and went to the hospital. I packed a bag, thinking it would be hours before I got to see her. That's the assumption I went in with. The cab driver asked me which part of the hospital I needed to get to. I froze, hadn't even thought there'd be parts. I think I'd imagined some central hospital processing unit through which all arrivals were fed. I told him I needed the trauma bay. He told me there was construction, but he'd get me as close as he could. We drove, I don't know for how long. We stopped. I looked out the window, saw a big sign saying, "Emergency," and so that's where I went. Inside was a crowd of people in variously shambolic states. There were no hospital staff. The only visible staff were security and doctors. I stood in a sort of line to register and began questioning whether I was in the right place, immediately convincing myself that I wasn't. Surely visitors shouldn't take up the valuable time of overworked ER staff. I saw signs on the wall for main entrance and information, and so set off in their direction, following another doctor through some automatic doors. They didn't stop me. I followed the signs till they ran out, and found myself in a dark corridor, lined with abandoned medical equipment, like the back alley behind a building site. It was obvious I'd gone awry. I retraced my steps and retraced them again, and arrived in another corridor, dimly lit and labelled Cardiovascular Research Unit. When I got back to the first doors, it was locked. I panicked, but I couldn't panic. I didn't give a shit about the panic beyond getting to Yelena. I remembered another door I'd seen, into the ambulance bay, past a group of people hosing out an ambulance, past the water running crimson over concrete. I got back to reception. There was a nurse there now. I gave Yelena's name, and she immediately said, "Come with me." She led me through the trauma bay, past the nurse's station, and into a room with 3 bays. She pointed to one on the right, saying, "I think that's her." There was beeping all around. Hooked rods hung from the ceiling, plastic tubes resting in the hooks, running into machines that strangely resembled the card readers on the city buses. I approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb a stranger. And for the first few seconds, that's exactly what I thought I was doing. I couldn't recognize the shape on the gurney before me. And then she looked at me, and there she was, my beloved. A body on a gurney attached by the veins to machines sharing her vitals. I went over and we started to cry. I knelt by her and we cried. I touched her and we cried. And we couldn't but cry. And we laughed. And everything dropped away. Nothing mattered beyond her and the fact that she was alive. I couldn't speak for the realization. We cried. I stroked her face, her hair, reduced the pressure on my fingers so they wouldn't catch in the dry blood on her face, in her hair. I was a meeting of horror and euphoria. I looked at her and felt such a sweet joy. I wanted to tell everyone who came past that the most incredible person in the world was lying in their trauma. Didn't they know how fucking lucky we were? She told me what had happened. Said she was so lucky and so stupid. We cried. My eyes were heavy and wet with belief, shock, love. There was beeping all around. We were delirious with shock and joy and love, together in the room of death life, everything being hyper-present and so totally falling away. And there was just us and our love for each other. And there's so much of that. The person next to us almost died. Could be dead as I write this, given what I heard floating over. Single stab wound, pupils unresponsive, draining. The room felt like a place where people had died in trauma, in traumatic ways. There was blood on the floor, splashed and pooled. There were waste bins stuffed and overflowing. The walls were cream, the lights were fluorescent. There was beeping all around. The beeping registered life, except not, because all it seemed to signal was death. Bodies reduced to flesh and blood, bone, fractures, stab wounds. Each beep and pause a reminder of flesh's fragility. That once skin is open, people matter no more. Except not, either. It was incredible how quickly the beeping became comforting background. As I watched the doctors clean her and stitch her head, she was yelling. In her awesome beauty and depth, she lay there and shone. She was so shiny. She was her body and so much more. I stood aside as the doctors worked, watching Yelena and the technology she was connected to. I felt a wave of horror at the attempt to make her flesh, in the cavernous bureaucracy in which people die. I can't describe the horror I felt of her dying. It sticks in my throat. I couldn't take my eyes off the equipment, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Because above it all, she arose. She was not just body and flesh, not just a patient, not just what had happened to her. She won through. She was there, talking, laughing, fucking laughing, like the most beautiful badass in the whole universe. Hit by a car, lying in a bloodied room with a dying man. Her spirit shone. There's so much of her, and it's all beautiful, all good.
There's a tweet by Existential Comics that I have thought a lot about. Foucault explaining things. Prison.
It's a prison.
School.
Also a prison.
Hospital.
Sick person prison.
Editors telling you to write clearly.
The greatest prison of all.
For me, the punchline has already happened in the fourth line. Though everyone is there to help you, and though you can go whenever you want, if you can move, if you have somewhere to go, and if you have someone to take you, being hospitalized feels like being in prison. It also feels like calling up the 1-800 number of a giant corporation to make a complaint, except instead of your toaster, it's your hip or your esophagus that's gone awry. In my case, I make the prison remark despite having an awareness of how much of an effort hospital staff made to treat me like a person. Before I went in for surgery, I was visited by the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, and the resident, each of whom individually explained to me what was going to happen, and each of whom asked if I had any questions regarding the procedure. And when I went into the operating room, the nurse in charge of my care introduced herself, as well as everyone else in the room, and carefully explained each step that I was going to be conscious for. Likewise, outside of the surgery, the nurses were genuinely caring and did their best to accommodate me in whatever way they could, tracking down the residents to bug them about why I'd been waiting so long, listening to my wails of pain about my cast and exchanging it for a larger size, and so on. Nonetheless, despite everyone's best efforts, being hospitalized still tends to be a pacifying experience. As a patient, you are primarily the recipient of actions undertaken by others, and you are very much at the behest of their schedules. You're in a room by yourself or with a neighbor behind a curtain, with a window, if you're lucky, though this window can't open. You wake up at some point, usually when you're woken up by the nurse during her morning round, or when you're woken up by the resident during his single morning round. You can then finally ask him the pile of questions you've been meaning to ask him all of yesterday, if you can remember them, given that you're probably drugged and confused and none of your family or friends is here to help you. At some point, the breakfast tray will come, or it won't come, or it'll come but you can't eat it because you're waiting for surgery. Nurses will come. At some point, a physiotherapist will arrive and she will look young and beautiful and fit and cheerful, and she will move her limbs smoothly and vigorously before you, demonstrating the exercises that you're supposed to do. Nurses will come again. Maybe at some point friends will show up and you will narrate your current physical state and they will tell you what's happening in their lives. Lunch and dinner will come at some point. If you have to shit, or you're in pain, or you need a pillow, there's a button by your bedside that you can press at any time. And this button alerts the nursing desk, and a nurse will come and visit you in 3 to 18 minutes, depending on what the other patients need, what time of day it is, and if any of the staff is on break at the moment. My friend Mel praised me for being strong and independent in this scenario, for fighting for my care if I didn't think I was being treated right, for continuing to ask questions, for acting, in short, like a person. I said, "Don't you see? I'm not strong and independent because I am strong and independent, because these are features that I possess. I'm strong and independent because I'm lucky. Because I didn't bump my head hard enough to get brain damage. Because I'm young and did a bunch of yoga, I can still contort and hop around and move enough that I still read as person." I overheard the niece of my neighbor correct the nurse once. "How are you doing, Mrs. So-and-so?" "Dr. So-and-so," the niece said. While most people this woman interacts with on a given day ask about her bowel movements or pain levels, her niece and nephew talk to her about the news. I say this too in awareness of how soft and unresilient I am given what a person is capable of surviving. The day after my surgery, I was visited by my surgeon, O'Brien. That morning, I had been taken out of a too small air cast that had pained me all night, and I had wept in bliss at the sudden lifting of the pain, which seemed as divine and inexpressible as the pain's arrival. Because of this, I greeted O'Brien somewhat giddily, effusively thanking him for how humanizing the surgical procedure had been, how everyone had explained to me exactly what was going to happen, and in short, how I really felt like I was being treated like a person. O'Brien smiled distantly and looked a million miles through me as if we were both made of clouds. I get the feeling that compared to the paraplegic who had been wheeled in to the ER for heart surgery yesterday, or the man with stab wounds who I think had died the week before, and how many more since, the seriousness with which I was treating my condition revealed only the softness of my privilege. Alternatively, I have no idea how people appear to you if you have recently seen their brains quieten and their organs fall asleep. I look down at the scar on my ankle and I'm struck by how DIY my body seems. I can't imagine how O'Brien feels.